There's nothing I want to talk about in the news today, and that's fine, because sometimes it's nice to talk about something a little more relaxing. And this might seem a little off topic, but it does relate to the Great Reset, and it is the death of true collector culture. I'm pacing back and forth here, thinking about what I want to talk about today, and I noticed in this box here I have a Super Nintendo that I recently acquired and a few games. And I thought to myself, 20 years from now, people won't be collecting, let's say, a PS5 and a bunch of games or whatever. And that's because of the shift towards digitally distributed games. And I thought, that's a pretty niche topic. I don't think I need to talk about that on my sort of economic and political YouTube channel. But then I started thinking, there's a lot of things like that. What do people collect anymore that's coming out today? What is coming out today that people can collect? Because, we don't really have snail mail anymore, so you don't have people who collect stamps. People don't send mail anymore, so people don't collect postcards. Video game media, I guess other than the Switch is still, which I give them credit for, they're hanging on to the cartridges. I appreciate that they're keeping them alive, because cartridge-based media and even optical disc-based media is fun to collect. It looks nice on the shelf. So I guess you could say, okay, well, there's the Switch, but that is sort of a subset. When it comes to, PC has been all digital for, gosh, how many years? Probably 15 at this point. It's been mostly digital. So you're not going to have people collecting PC games anymore. You have, really, Xbox and PlayStation are phasing that out rapidly. Even if you do have the physical media, it loads it onto the hard drive like an old PC game. Cars are not really the kind of thing that you would collect anymore. They are not built to last. They're not the kinds of things that you can keep serviced and sort of up to snuff. They have a shelf life. It was all, as I talked about in the Dodge Challenger and Charger video, those cars, while this is kind of an end of an era, those cars already were a far cry from what they were back in the 70s and 60s, and it is not such an easy thing, 10 to 20 years from now, to keep those kinds of cars, the Dodge Chargers and Challengers that they're still putting out until they're discontinued next year, keeping them up and running. These things are way too complicated. They're not end-user serviceable. And then once you get to electric cars, then all that goes out the window entirely. Electric cars are going to be built very much to be disposable. There will be nobody who hangs on to an electric car for more than a few years. So car collecting is dead. Stamp collecting is dead. Postcard collecting is dead. I guess there are probably still people who collect baseball cards. Comic book collecting, that's dead because the comic book industry has killed itself and alienated all of its fans. They hate nerds, and they like wokesters. So, nerds were the people who bought comic books. Wokesters don't really buy comic books. They'll just like your posts on Twitter, or they'll tweet out like a single panel from a screenshot from a comic book, and say something like "Slay Queen." So comic book collecting is dead. Streaming has killed film collecting. People do not collect films anymore. Is it still possible to do that, though? I guess. I think most movies you can buy on Blu-ray, and they do actually play off of the Blu-ray disc. But here I am rambling for almost 5 minutes now, and I still haven't gotten to the point. The point is that this, to me, feels very much feels very much in line with the Great Reset agenda of ending private ownership of scarce resources. I mean, collecting in and of itself is rooted in the idea of scarcity. The fun is in having something that other people do not have and that very other few people, if anyone, is able to possess. It's a purely recreational expression of the right of private property. It's a celebration of your right as a human being, as a free person, to own things. In a world where you own nothing, there is no collecting. It's not a hobby that is able to exist. The last vestige of collecting as a hobby seems to exist in the form of these soy boys and their Funko Pops. I think that there might actually be an exception. If you read the Great Reset Agenda published by the World Economic Forum, I think they specifically hollowed out an exemption for Funko Pops. People are allowed to own those. And that is what you're allowed to collect. But other than that, physical media, nope. They're going to reserve the right to take away, any sort of media that you might like to consume or collect, whether that be a film, a video game, or a book even. How could I leave? I can't believe I didn't mention book collecting before. These are all things that will be controlled by the streaming services. You will have no recourse if they decide to cancel your favorite movie, your favorite book, your favorite video game, what have you. You will not be able to collect classic cars because they're all going to be junk. You'll be lucky to own one car that's functioning because of the extreme scarcity of the resources that are used to build the cars that the Wizards of Smart have declared good and woke. And the collectibles that people have enjoyed amassing over the last century or so, they will just continue to become more and more scarce, more and more rare, and more sought after, because there will not be any new collectibles that come about in the future. In 1970, I don't think that someone could have predicted that people would start collecting Nintendo games, which hadn't even come out yet. Well, at that time they probably had Hot Wheels or whatever, things like that, little toys, collectible toys. Maybe in the 1850s, people couldn't have been able to predict that there would be toy collectors in the world. But that's because back then things were quite scarce. And as the Industrial Revolution gained steam, quite literally, and as our economy expanded, goods in general became much more abundant, and people were producing all of these things. Things which we didn't necessarily need, but they were things that people wanted. Some things were made to be expendable, and people hung on to them anyway, just as a reminder of the good old days, like oil cans. There were all sorts of things that you would never imagine, unless you were someone who was fond of collecting them, that they would become collectible. But we're not going to have that in the future if people don't own things. Human beings will have to discover new hobbies, like eating paint chips or bashing their head against the wall. And that makes me sad, because that's one of the few hobbies that I have. It's something that's just always been in me. And it could be anything that kind of is old or reminds me of something from the past. I just have a desire to cling on to it. Now, you might just say, I'm a hoarder, but at least I'm not the only one. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow. I plan on discussing something a little more substantive, but sometimes it's good just to think out loud about what comes to mind.